Nick, can you stay with us, because I know people will have questions. It's just I'm really anxious to speak to Katie Montgomery, who is a feminist and trans right activist, who is very, very passionate about this and has got a very limited amount of time with us, I believe. Good morning to you, Katie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, not at all. I believe you are outraged by this move by the Westminster government, yeah?
Yeah, it's just absolutely crazy and disproportionate for what this bill does. I don't think people realise how minor this bill is. It doesn't affect single-sex spaces, it doesn't affect sports, it doesn't affect prisons, it doesn't affect women's shelters. This is just about letting trans people get married, die, and collect their pension in dignity in a slightly easier way. And they've decided to use the nuclear option effectively on Scottish democracy to block this minor bill, which will affect, hundreds of people in Scotland.
So you believe it does not affect single-sex spaces. Let me bring in...
that's just factually the case.
Okay.
It just factually does not.
Okay. Karen Harradine is with us. Good morning to you, Karen.
Hi, good morning, Kay.
Good morning. You believe it does affect, amongst other things, single-sex spaces?
Absolutely. And it also affects teenagers. I mean, the Act means that the age of consent for this has been lowered to 16. These are kids that we're talking about. I find that, I'm not a fan of Rishi, but for once he's made the right decision. And as long as Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom, this is a correct parliamentary procedure.
Okay. Hang on, Karen. What I really want to do is we'll try and go through this stage by stage. And yes, concerns have been raised by other people about the fact that, the age is 16, although someone would have to live in their new gender for 6 months before they could self-identify. But nonetheless, that is a marked change. But let's go back to the fact that, Katie, you do not believe that this has any impact on anyone else except that very small number of individuals who would like to more easily get a gender recognition. Sorry, I'm being very pedantic, but I just think it's important because, there's so much misunderstanding over this. So your belief is very much this affects a very, very small number of people who will be able to more easily get a gender recognition certificate and to go and live their lives more easily. It will have no impact on anyone else. That's your contention. Karen thinks that it will have an effect on other people.
And the reason I think this is that, I'm not talking necessarily about trans men or trans women who just want to live their lives. I'm talking about men out there who will take advantage of this, and we know that they will, and use it.
No, that's false, because they passed this law in 18 plus other countries around the world, and no one's exploited it in Argentina, for example.
No, hang on. We need to hear you both. Hang on, Karen, please. Karen, please. Katie, would you like to respond?
Yes, and I think it's ridiculous to say that it could affect women's spaces, because in order to even get a gender recognition certificate, you have to live as a woman for 6 months or previously for 2 years in order to even get a certificate, which involves using women's spaces. As part of the bill, you don't show your birth certificate to use a women's toilet, a women's shelter, or anything. If you were ever challenged, you would show your ID, which would be your passport or your driving license, which have already been self-ID for decades. It's just not something you do. No one shows their birth certificate at any stage in their life to use a women's space.
Karen, is your contention that by making it easier to obtain a gender recognition certificate, there will be a number of nefarious individuals who misuse that ease and for...
What?
Well, yeah. As well as the fact that this is regressive for women's rights. There's no other way to look at it than that. And the most major point for me is that the very same politicians doing this are the same that have created terrible issues in the United Kingdom. And they're using this really as a distraction from what they've done with the awful social and economic consequences of lockdown.
Sorry, I don't know the connection. What's the connection here, Karen?
The connection question is, if you have a look at these politicians today,
what politicians?
This is really narcissistic identity politics. This is a storm in a teacup. There are far more important things for us to be concentrating on. For example, the harm caused by the same politicians over the last few years when it comes to things like lockdown and the social and economic cost of that. Why are they not addressing that? Why are they not fixing the harms that they've done rather than using this as a distraction as well as identity politics? It's a cultural war that, for me,
well, governments are responsible for passing a whole range of legislation. I don't think it's an either-or situation, Karen. And, the Scottish Government has been engaged in this for some time now, and they have come to the decision that for this group of people, albeit a small group of people, but a group of people that the Scottish Government believes is marginalised and vulnerable, that they have decided to make these moves. It doesn't mean they're not going to engage with other policy areas. I think that's kind of a leap, I have to say. But we can see how political that this is getting. And I'm just going to go back and forward to the text that we're getting in just to see where you stand on it. I appreciate it's probably a very difficult conversation to come into and to pick up the phone. But please do, whether it is a question you have, whether you are confused about something, whether you have a strong view, 08085 92 95 00. This is a significant moment. It is the first time in the history of devolution that the Westminster Government has felt moved, for whatever reason, to block a piece of Scottish legislation. They say they have valid reason to do so. They say that it clashes with UK-wide equality legislation. The Scottish Government pushes back on that and says that it does not contravene UK-wide equality legislation, and this is pure politicking. It is trampling over the sovereignty of Holyrood. And I want to know your thoughts. 08085 92 95 00. The Westminster Government have simply been waiting for an opportunity to flex its muscle, show who's boss. This has absolutely nothing to do with the implications of the Gender Recognition Bill, all to do with a right-wing Tory government picking a slightly controversial topic to once again challenge the democracy of the Scottish people. We should all be concerned about this action. David says, as a lifelong supporter of SNP and independence, I'm glad Westminster have stepped in on this one, as I strongly disagree with the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. Always thought it was strange the amount of time and resource spent on the GRR bill, a bill that relates to such a small demographic of our society. Approximately 0.5% of Scottish population should have known with this SNP government grievance was the goal as usual. This, in my opinion, is what this focus has been all the time, planned grievance making when they knew the bill would have to be challenged by Westminster. Katie Montgomery, can I ask you, are you frustrated by the fact that, this legislation, which was designed to make life easier, or to make it easier for people to obtain a gender recognition certificate, has now become the most incredible political football?
Oh, it's so frustrating. I mean, this really could have just been proposed, debated, and passed, in a few years. And we've been debating this now for like 6 years. There's been 3 public consultations. There's been a public inquiry, debate in Parliament, and now it's looking like it's going to be dragged out for months, years, potentially even becoming a nationwide, or geopolitical scandal almost, over something that, just is such a minor improvement for such few people. It's incredibly frustrating, yeah.
I'm not going to ask you anything about your personal circumstances, but clearly you declare yourself to be a trans right activist. Can you give people listening an idea of why you believe it is so important for these reforms to be introduced? What difference will it make to the trans community's lives?
So the bill itself just makes it a bit easier. So, I mean, that is kind of important. If you want to get married, or if you're, coming up to the end of your life and you're considering about the future, then this is important. It's an important thing to have the correct documents and to just make your life easier. But now it's because it's become this like political, proxy war over trans people's rights. It's kind of sending the signal that even the most minor improvement on trans people's lives is going to be opposed at the highest possible level by, the Conservative government, who are willing to override democracy effectively to stop these minor improvements. It just sends this message that it's just trans people's lives aren't worth improving. So if it passes, it would combat that?
It is possible, currently possible to get a gender recognition certificate. Yeah. It's also possible to live your life as you want to lead it without a gender recognition certificate. What makes this so much better than the status quo? What's so bad about the status quo? Is Katie dropped there?
Hello, sorry, I'm still
Hi,
here.
sorry.
That's okay. I transitioned years and years ago, and when I transitioned, I got a new driving license, a new passport, changed my details at work, everything. Everything changed apart from I couldn't get a gender recognition certificate because it required me to go through the NHS waiting lists, which are years and years long, go through the medical process, which is then years on top of that, then apply for all these things. And I only got my gender recognition certificate this year. If I had wanted to get married, or I wanted to, I was, going to die or something, then I might have missed out on that because it was like 7 years for me after getting my new passport, which is the thing that's actually important, the thing I would use for women's spaces, traveling around the world. Between getting that and then getting this, certificate, which hasn't made any actual change to my life yet because I haven't got to those parts of my life. And also just the process. I had to submit 45 pages of documents for this, with horrible levels of detail about my medical and private life. And to get a new passport, I only had to submit 3 pages. So it's just rubbish as it is today.
Do you have any time for people who say, look, I'm not in any way anti-trans people or trans rights or whatever, but I don't think it is a process that should be taken lightly. I am worried that there may be people, and I'm not talking about trans community, I'm talking about there may be people with bad intentions who misuse the ease of getting a gender recognition certificate for nefarious means.
I sympathise with people who worry about trans people and what that means for society, because lots of people have never encountered a trans person before. This is the first time hearing about it, and they don't understand and they don't know. But what I would say to anyone who's worried about people misusing this law is 2 things. One is this law, as I've said a few times, only affects things like marriage, death, taxes, pension. There's nothing anyone can use to misuse that. The things that you might be worried about people misusing are, say, using women's spaces or getting a passport with the wrong, sex on it for whatever reason. But those things, using women's spaces, is covered by the Equality Act 2010, and passports is its own different regulation, which has been around for years. Those are already in practice, and we can already just look and see that those aren't, affected. There's not people exploiting those. But then on the actual gender recognition bill itself and this concept of self-ID, there are over 18 countries around the world, some for over a decade, who have already passed effectively the same law. Many states in the US have an even more progressive law on this, where you can just go to a judge and they'll just change your birth certificate. It's just done. There's no living in your gender of 6 months, there's no medical process, etc. And they've had this in operation for such a long time, and there is just no evidence. If there was evidence of this being misused, all of the people opposing this bill would be, saying, 10% of people in here, and, this country had this, and it's just not the case. It just hasn't been the case anywhere in the world this has passed.
Okay. Katie, listen, thank you for your time. I know that you have to go. That's Katie Montgomery, their feminist and trans right activist.